Any questions from the floor to our distinguished guests? Question over there. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that, Scott. Really, really very interesting. Helen Kerrin, Glen Kens Community and Arts Trust in the Stewartry in the centre of Dumfries and Galloway. A question really for all of you. Inspiring to hear about communities coming together and international communities and local communities, and to reflect on that and the difference that people can make when they come together in those first stages. Just to put a slightly different spin on it, in the Glen Kens have been doing that for whatever reason for decades now. I don't know what it is about the place. I'm delighted to have been part of it for the last 4 years. But we have now built our confidence, our capacity, our empowerment, and what we have clarified our strategic ambition. We know what it is that we want to achieve for our communities, and we are now coming up against the barriers of we need strategic partners to do that. We need agencies to do things differently, whether it's and to somehow have a change of culture at that. I think it is at that regional level that they can interface with us and we can walk forward together hand in hand as strategic partners. So when our community action plan overlaps with your regional economic strategy, great, why aren't we running towards it? You know, why is it still so hard? So I just wondered if the panel had any views on that.
Great question, thank you. I'll give it a go first. Yeah, I think Glen Kens is a great example of people to coming together around a sense of shared purpose, and I think in your example it's around place, yeah, and people in place particularly. There's probably a couple of ingredients I would reflect on first of all to say, kind of what does that good coming together look like? First is you need to find your like, and that's not finding everyone like you. A place like Dumfries and Galloway, as Scott's mentioned, is actually in a diverse kind of region. Finding lots of people with the same interest and the same intention and the same purpose is quite difficult, and I think in the Glen Kens is a perfect example, and there are others. You've found that because your sense of purpose is in place. The second piece, I think, is a bit more difficult, and I think it comes down to both, well, firstly, I would say confidence, and I think the important bit of collaboration is being confident to tell people or ask people to get out of the way. And we're all being in collaboratives in spaces where everyone comes together to talk about solutions you want to, but actually the worst thing you can do in a collaborative space is just attract people who want to tell you why it's absolutely not possible, or people in the room who can always find the problems in something. Now sometimes that's helpful to be really honest and transparent, but actually if it never moves anywhere because of those problems, then actually we need to be confident enough to ask people to get out of the way because there's other people who want to do something. And to your main question, I think that then reflects on why this idea of partnership working or working with big sector, public sector organisations who need to enable this is probably quite difficult, because I think what you're coming up against is the fact that other people feel that they own that. You're coming into my place, why have you got a plan for your place when it's my job to have a plan for the place? Why are you looking at economic development when that's mine? Why are you looking at creating services when that's mine? Actually, there's something in the idea that part of my intro this morning, which is we need to get out of the way. All this stuff belongs to communities and all well-meaning people, and I'm not getting to all my colleagues working in the public sector here, you're all doing an incredible job, but we do have a society that's built on a reliance, a paternalistic view that we need to wait for public services to tell us to do anything. Now we have inspired communities who want to take ownership. It's about asking other people to get out of the way. So I recognise that it's difficult, and the difficulty you have is the power and money stops some of those coming to life, which you don't always have. And a bit of a plug, the very reason that we've created the concept of the DG Collective and the Invest DG model, which is attracting external investment to our region, is that we don't have to wait for public services to move. We can do it on our own. So get out of the way, let's find our own way of doing it with our own investment, is my top two thoughts there.
Thank you. I'm Marsali, I'm the chair of Dumfries and Galloway Citizens Advice Service. Absolute pleasure to be here today. I think Alan has touched on a lot of what I would have said, but I do think there is something about the really big question for everybody that lives here, who has a job here, who is a councillor, who is a public servant. What kind of region do we actually want to be? And if we can get some kind of good collaboration around what that looks like, I think those individuals and organisations would have to get out of the way and give away some of their power. So I think there's a really fundamental question for us as a region about what do we actually want to be here? We've had conversations about national parks, we have conversations about marine protected areas, actually, what do we want to see as a region that allows us to have an economy that is built on really good stuff and that keeps people here and that attracts here, and that means that we can sustain the fantastic stuff that we've already got.
Thanks very much, Marsali. I'm Valerie White. I'm Director of Public Health at NHS Dumfries and Galloway. And I think, Helen, if there was an easy answer to that, we would have done it. We would have done it by now. And I think that this came up as one of the questions in the workshop that I held. And I think we need to try new things, as Alan's highlighted about the kind of the DG Collective, the DG Invest. We need to move into these different spaces to be having different conversations. I think there is, my colleagues here from primary care are here obviously, asking about what we want what people want from GP practices. And I think there has been a bit of a mind shift in terms of health and social care, in terms of actually how do we work in different ways with the third sector in our communities. I don't think we're there yet. I think we've still got a long way to go, but I think there is a commitment to that journey. I think what can be really, really difficult is getting the right spaces to have those conversations, and I think that's what the collective can help support us to do. But I certainly think I've seen a mind shift. As I say, I'm not saying we're there yet. There's still a long way to go, but definitely I think there's that space to do it.
I'm interested to hear what all of you were saying, and when Donna was speaking this morning, she used the word relational, which has been sparking in my brain a lot recently, because actually when we strip down our roles, our sectors, our job descriptions, all of that, we're all people who, most of us live and work in Dumfries and Galloway and have worries and concerns and all the rest of it, but we don't often connect as the human beings that we are, and we bring our job description and our role in our sector and our strategies to the conversation rather than ourselves as individuals. So how do we, and that creates those barriers, doesn't it? Because I was talking about this to Callum from the Scottish Government earlier, because it's the same kind of thing. The conversations that you have at the lunch table are different to the conversations you have at the community planning partnership table or the forum table. So how do we, and we've all got to step in, because we as the third sector say they just need to do that. Those nameless, faceless public sector people just need to do that. They're all humans too. So how do we all step in as individuals and as humans and change the culture? Because that takes bravery and risk. So what's your thoughts on how we kind of do that and connect relationally with each other? Because the structures are great, we need the structures, but we've also got to step in as people, so they don't just become bureaucratic structural things. They actually become centres and mechanisms for change.
Alan and I were at a conference last week in Glasgow. It was a third sector interface conference, and one of the things that we were talking about was how do you kind of create those relationships, and it's spending time with each other. Grace I think is a really important part of that. It's getting to know what kind of makes people tick. I think Dumfries and Galloway is a fantastic region, as Marsali has said. There is such passionate people. We all care really, really deeply. We've got really strong connections to this region, and I think that's what that is what connects us. I've had some really great conversations with people in the workshops today, some really challenging questions. Now, I can't say that I've got an answer to that, but I've heard what that person has said to me, and that will stay in kind of my brain when I'm having other conversations. So I think that opportunity to have connections and spaces like this conference today have been really, really fantastic, and we all say this when we have these things. We're very much living on Teams at the moment, and that I don't think helps with that kind of connection and getting to know each other. So I think hopefully there'll be another conference next year. And I hope to get kind of out and about and see, other people and have conversations as well. I don't think there's a simple way. I think spending time and just saying it as you see it, because you don't know the influence that you have on other people, but it starts to come through in conversations I can have with other people that I interact with as well. So look forward to some more during the break of these conversations. I'll hand over to Marsali.
Thank you. Great question, Grace. I think there is something about having the time and space to do that. I think there's also something about recognising that to do that really well takes a bit of time, and you have to trust and respect and communicate really well with those individuals. And you can disagree about things if you do it in a respectful and open way. So there is something about behaviours there for me, and also about if you take away the job titles and the organisations, there is also something about leadership there. Because everybody does come to conversations like this with their job in their head, and you can have frank conversations in spaces where you put your job title to one side. But ultimately, I think there's something about the messaging that all of our sectors is building and the conversations that we're allowing to happen. This should be the start of a much broader conversation across the DG collective that's being set up, and also the rest of the sector. So where's the time and the space for that to happen? Because you can't just have the third sector talking to itself. There does need to be that very open and honest relationship-built conversation with the public sector, regardless of which agency that might be. So really good question. I think it takes time, though. I think you can't do that in 3 months, just like you can't do a budget consultation in 3 months either. I think it takes a bit of time.
Thanks, and I agree, great question. There are probably so many aspects to it. I think from my experience, I'm nearly 2 years here now, one of my first kind of forays into representing the sector is in all the partnership spaces, and if you're operating in that space, Dumfries and Galloway is definitely not short of partnerships. We have a space to talk about absolutely everything. The difficulty is that I think we've formed partnership as a formal structure. We use it quite passively as we're just going to form a partnership and talk in a partnership. We'll send that community planning partnership, the poverty and inequalities partnership, and so on, and therefore it's self-fulfilling in terms of a structure of, and it's very often the same people. So we talk about going to meetings with your hat, but sometimes you have to wear 4 or 5 depending on the room that you're in. And actually I think that's so disempowering to send our colleagues into spaces where they have no autonomy to do anything about it in that relational way, for example. So I'm going to lean into leadership. I think this idea of having to hold on, to protect, to justify every minute of your time, to fill in all your KPIs, to worry about what your board or elected members or partners may think about what you're doing. And Callum and I, where Callum's getting picked out today, but I have this conversation quite a lot around this generating, constantly having to justify everything you do to make sure the money has value, actually in itself stops some of those relational things, because you have to do stuff and you count the stuff. And someone at a conference, in fact, it was at the First Minister's leadership session on whole family support earlier this year, reminded us all that listening and learning is also work. It counts. Being in a space to hear from other people, to digest what's going on, to learn and do something different is also work. And I think that leads into the point about the time and space. In the current climate, time is not our friend, and it's certainly not the friend of the third sector, because the machinery of everything else, where the money flows and how the decisions are made, are going fast, whether we're catching up or not. But I'll come back down to, again, this idea of collective leadership. To Marsali's point, if we're all agreed on the things we want to achieve, we need everyone to be moving at that pace with that intention and help shape their organisations to respond in that way. So without that leadership, I think it's difficult for everyone else to change their job, to take off the hat, to have the conversation, because the leadership expects you to do that. And there's a bit about changing that space. And I think, listen, there's a commitment to doing it. There is a commitment to do it. But I think you're spot on. Until we do that, it makes everything else about change far too difficult.
And I would also just add, I think the governance arrangements in their broadest sense across the whole region probably need a bit of a rethink, because I think they strangle the life out of a lot of stuff. So I think if we could do something around governance and make it much more meaningful and slick and less onerous, it would be really helpful as well.
Hi, it's Ros Surtees from Old School Thornhill. It's not a criticism in any way, because this has been an absolutely brilliant day and the networking and the opportunities are fantastic. An observation is that I was at table 3 just now, and that was a conversation about net zero. It wasn't a huge crowd, I noticed there were few people talking about the issue of climate change, and obviously you brought it up. Is there a way that there could be a thread of this huge risk to our planet for everything that we talk about? Was it that for me going to that discussion was, well, perhaps I ought to be at a different place, a different table? I'm being very honest here, because actually this is possibly the most important issue. So is there a way that we could have a thread of bringing that into all of our conversations, rather than at, 3:30 or whatever time it was, I'm going to talk about net zero and climate change?
So with a different hat on, I'm a non-executive for NHS Dumfries and Galloway, and I have the fantastic honour of being the net zero champion for the board, where my role is to prompt people to think about the climate in all sorts of ways, in terms of how we use buildings, how we dispose of things, how we use land. And it would be fantastic, and it's probably, again, when I talked earlier about it takes a bit of time, it would be fantastic if we could build some momentum right across the region, maybe using some of the conversations that we should have as a board with patients, families, carers and citizens about what green care pathways look like, because that's a really interesting way into how we travel, how we consume, how we dispose. And I think we've got a long way to go in that space, and again, with my NHS hat on, we don't have a lot of capacity from an officer point of view to do all that work, but it's so fundamental to how we live and how we will live in future. My answer is absolutely yes. The trick is how we do that, and I think that needs to be explored, and probably in a different space.
Yeah, I'll just come in because I've just taken over the executive lead for climate change, so work very closely now with Marsali on this agenda, and I think it'd probably be really helpful to have some of those conversations. It certainly is. There's huge policy directions from Scottish Government in relation to the NHS and what it's got to do in that space, and I think it'd be really helpful to think about it. Also, just in terms of the population health framework in the workshop, that's absolutely seen climate change as a key part of kind of places and communities. So I think one of the things I can certainly do is take back into my national conversations the key role that the third sector can play in that space, and promote that as well. So I will do that following this conference as well. Thank you.
No, absolutely, Rose. Thank you so much for your question. We'll certainly take on board the feedback about the structure of the conference. I think the fact that we've recognised the importance of having the conversation is why it's on the agenda. But yes, we probably do need to thread that through. I think it alludes to some of the points we're saying around a lot of our work at the moment relies on champions, individual people with a passion. We actually need to open up a wider community conversation and a wider sector conversation about that. So I absolutely take that feedback. We're trying our best to work with Climate Hub around how we bring those conversations to the table moreover, but I think some of the difficulty is that we do have champions, individual interests, and we actually need a collective, a much bigger interest. So absolutely take on board that feedback, and if you come back next year, I'll promise there'll be something all about it. I've been told not to promise another conference next year because I've got no money. However, I'll see you all next year.
So from conversations today, it's apparent that young people are underrepresented across communities and organisations for a number of reasons. But one common theme is some services are just not sure how to go about it, how to work with and communicate with young people. How do we fix that going forward from today? It's almost as if we need a how-to guide giving adults the confidence to take a chance on young people. If we don't get brave and take this forward, what does the future look like for communities?
Great question. Fantastic reflections for us all as well, Max. Thank you very much. Interestingly, I had a conversation, we were just having a conversation over lunch with colleagues about involving young people. Some of the fear we now have of using the word consulting, because the minute you talk to public sector about consulting, you've got a whole big massive framework of 30 pages of guidance you have to actually just open up a conversation with young people for, as an example, which does get in the way. For our sector perspective, and there's a discussion table that Max and Emma have been leading, which is actually all about how we help young people take the lead. There's a bit about, and conversation I've had with Youth Council and others before as well, around this idea that young people of the future. So we need to think of their interests and actually what will they be when they grow up, you know, just to paraphrase some of the work. But actually, young people are now. We've heard from our youth councillors this morning about the incredible work they're doing to change the systems we have, to inspire different thinking, to encourage those with power to do something different. So my two responses are: we need more young people in the decision-making spaces, not as consultees, but with a power and agency to make a decision, including on our third sector boards. And there are ways to manage and make that happen, but some of that community leadership can absolutely come and be inspired from young people. And I think secondly, certainly from our sector perspective, we need to get rid of some of those barriers. We all have to have a really complicated governing document that's all leadership and kind of systems language from the 1970s. And I spoke with one of my colleagues actually earlier today, and we've agreed already from today we're going to work with other organisations to create easy read versions and samples of third sector constitutions and governing documents that helps everyone understand exactly what they should be doing and attract more young people into those leadership roles. There are so much more I can talk about, but those are two biggies for me. More young people in leadership, take out some of the barriers to make things simple to listen to young people.
Yeah, I would agree with those completely. From a citizens' advice perspective, I would love for us to have a younger person on our board, and we have tried through various conversations through our youth engagement officer to find young people who are willing to do that. I think there is something about how boards are perceived that we probably need to do some work on, because they're seen as being a bit fuddy-duddy and a bit for older people to be dealing with, not anything that's of real interest to me. But if we're looking at how we transform and build things for the future, we absolutely need to have the people who are going to be using and offering those services around that table, helping design that stuff. So if there's anybody that you know who'd like to be a trustee of Citizens Advice, please just let me know. It would be fantastic to have someone really insightful, with a totally different perspective, who doesn't come with any governance baggage or any professional baggage around the table.
Thanks very much, Marsali. And I suppose what I would just want to reflect on is I have seen how eloquently our youth councillors have spoken at numerous events that I've been involved in or been invited to, and just the value that they can have on any board of any organisation is absolutely huge. So I think as Marsali is saying, you know, anybody who's got a board and got positions, bringing young people on, I think there is something about the language that we use, because we, you know, certainly in the NHS we certainly can overcomplicate things, and I think it's about making things accessible and simple for everybody as well. And I think we are looking forward to inviting our youth councillors to come and have a conversation with us in the NHS as to how we can actually look at things differently going forward. So it'll be great to have those conversations early in the new year.
Hi, Angela Nisbet from New Start Recycling Annan. We spoke lots today about change and public service reform coming down the track, and it's clear there's going to be much more demand on third sector going forward. And I think the challenge we've got is, how do we support the organisations who are out there day to day in the job? How do we support them to come together, to collaborate, to bring that change about?
So I think part of the answer to that is the stuff we've started hearing about DG Collective and the funding. I think the third sector sometimes can be its own worst enemy, and that's partly because we're all set up to go for the same funding. And you know, you can be really good friends with somebody, but actually when it comes to it, you might fall out with them because you're all chasing the same pots of money. So I think there is something about how we recognise that and use those groups that are being set up through third sector D&G to have really honest and open conversations about that challenge and how we can actually try and overcome some of that stuff. I think the public sector does need to recognise more broadly the impact that its decisions can have, which are taken without any kind of conversation, and how that lands with people out there doing the hard day jobs at the front line, who are thinking they're not going to have a job in 6 months, a year's time, if they don't have funding. So I think there's a number of ways into that, I think. But I do think the offer from third sector D&G has to be one which harnesses the whole voice of the third sector. And it feels like that's really starting today in this room. So I really look forward to seeing where that goes and what next year's conference looks like, even though you've got no money.
I'll find the money. Thanks for your question. One of the things I'm always conscious of is the size and scale and shape of our sector, and the fact we've got so many small organisations, volunteer-run organisations, those organisations that rely on just a small amounts of investment and do incredible work, but if they're not available for that meeting at 2 o'clock on a Thursday, then they completely miss out on the opportunity. So there are 3 strands. I think one is a couple that Marsali's mentioned. The concept, and it is a concept because we've just put the idea out there of the DG Collective, is an opportunity for the sector to find people like them, similar minds, who can come together and do something better collectively together with the resources they have. The second is the Invest DG model, and if you've been to the workshop already with Roddy around how we attract more long-term sustainable investment, I would love a big massive pot of money for the long term that the third sector is invested out, rather than us all relying on individual grants all the time. But the third is about we need to get better use of technology. So one of the areas we're exploring with colleagues from South of Scotland Enterprise is about the potential to invest in a digital platform that means wherever you are in the sector, at whatever time of day you've got time to engage, you can go online into a platform, you can find people like you with the same interests, and you can start to collaborate. So one of the kind of rules we've set is collaboration isn't just in the room having the conversation. Collaboration needs to be about doing stuff, finding people with a like mind, with the right purpose, and technology in our region is going to be essential to make that happen. To Marsali's point about yes, funding is really tight. I would love to see the third sector having more power about, once you've invested your money, let us decide how best to get to the outcomes, rather than lots of individual contracts that are managed on activity. So it is a real challenge, but the collective is out there and it will only be sector leaders. To my point earlier on, some people will find that difficult, some people will find the problems in that system. It's not really the place for you. If you're ready to be in, then you can join in. And the last point I wanted to make is I think as a sector we need to get better at helping each other out. We have enough large and medium organisations, and just spending some time working with local community groups to make sure they have what they need, spend an hour giving them some advice, overcoming a challenge, will really lift our sector up into that leadership space. It's too competitive at the moment and sometimes too internal just because of the environment. So I think as a sector there's a few things that I would just challenge our sector to help each other out of a bit of that rut and to start to think differently. Totally possible, and it will take us some time, but we've got an idea, I suppose, and it's just how many leaders want to join in.